everyone, and welcome to our Cambridge Early Years webinar. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm Georgia Robinson from Cambridge University Press and Assessment, and today's speaker will be Early Years author and teacher trainer Claire Medwell. So that's all from me. I'll now hand you over to Claire to begin the webinar.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you for that introduction. Okay, well, hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all from all over the world, wherever you might be. My name's Claire. I'm based in Spain, where I've been living and teaching and teacher training and writing course books for early years for the last many years. I've been teaching for the last 27 years. And have been involved in teacher training and writing textbooks for early years since the early 2000s. So today what we're going to be looking at is play-based learning in the early years setting. I'm hoping to give you lots of practical tips, hopefully some little takeaways that you can use in class tomorrow. But we'll also be looking at a lot of the rationale, the reasons for using play and relying on play for learning in the ESL context. So today we're going to have a look at some of the contents. First, we're going to be looking at why play in the early years classroom. Possibly quite self-explanatory for many of us, but we're going to be looking at some of the important advantages of it in their overall development. We're going to have a look at some child-initiated play ideas, followed by guided play ideas, which is where the teacher plays more of a role. And then we're going to have a look at how to implement play-based learning effectively in the early years environment. So let's have a look at why play? Why play? Well, if we think back to when we were younger, just think of all the games we played. Really, play is how young children make sense of the world around them. And usually they'll play games, for example, role plays about cooking, playing mummies and daddies. Everything around them is all about play, and play is discovery. So here are some particular quotes that I particularly liked. The power of play. The first one is, this is from the National Association for the Education of Young Children. This is the American Association. There's a very nice link to an article on play-based learning here. And the impulse to play comes from a natural desire to understand the world. This is how children in early years settings learn. The second one, I particularly like this because of the almost all creativity involves purposeful play. And this is going to be a little hook for this webinar today, in that how does purposeful play help us as teachers in the early years classroom, and how does it help in the overall development of the children we are teaching? And finally, an Einstein quote, which is, play is the highest form of research, which in my opinion at these ages, it clearly is. So moving on, let's look at play matters. So play matters, got a little double entendre here, in that play matters, in that it's important, but also that there are many different play matters that we can use in the young learners classroom. So for example, what types of play? There are many different types of play, and here I've chosen to put them into these categories. So we're looking at games with rules. So for example, we have an example of a little boy here who's playing Snakes and Ladders, which is a popular game in my culture. It may not be in yours, but this is a popular board game. Not all board games are appropriate in the early years. We have to choose board games which are appropriate for the age group. Something like Snakes and Ladders is an appropriate one because it will involve counting, but it also involves things like developing the children's fine and gross motor skills. So by gross motor skills, we mean how they move their body, for example. That might be more physical games, but these fine motor skills. So children are moving counters, they're playing with the dice, etc. So here we're developing the fine motor skills, leading to things like holding a pencil correctly. So we're developing their emerging literacy skills as well, and pre-writing skills. We have outside games. So for example, physical play. Well, obviously this will be working on their gross motor skills. We're looking at their balance, for example. Here we have an example of this. Then we have things like pretend play. So we might include role play in that. And we have a little girl in a lovely little toy kitchen where she's making her own recipe and she's dressed up as a cook. And then we have things like symbolic play. Symbolic play, an example of this is the little girl in the corner who is using the banana as a telephone. So this is when you use other objects to represent other objects. So for example, a banana becomes a telephone. Hello, how are you today? Okay. So symbolic play and also the physical play. Now, of these types of games, we thought we'd begin with a little bit of an interactive activity, and we're going to launch a poll. And I'd like you to think about, in terms of a scale of 1 to 5, how successful do you think these games, these types of games on the left, are in the early years classroom? So take about 30 seconds to decide on a scale to 1 to 5. So 1 is obviously not very successful, and 5 is to represent extremely successful. So we've got games with rules. This could also be games with rules, just while you're thinking about that. It could be, for example, a physical game as well. So something like a game where the teacher gives instructions and they have to stand up, sit down, hop on one leg, turn around, for example. That could be a game with rules because it has instructions to follow. Okay, so everyone's making their decisions now. In a minute, we'll have a little look at your results and your opinions on this question. There's a lot of voting going on here. Okay, so I think, have you all made your opinion now? Let's have a look at the results, which I think are going to come up now. Okay, so looking at these results, we have, it's we had another webinar this morning on the same topic, and they're very, very similar results to yours. That of these games, we're looking at about 60% are extremely useful in the early years classroom, 35, and the rest is 31%, followed by, well, only very small 1% says that they're not successful in the early years classroom. These, in my opinion, having taught for many years in the early years, all of these play an important role in the early years classroom when we're looking at play-based learning. So let's move on. Just bear with me for 1 minute as we get out of the poll. Okay, so just moving on. So we're looking at the importance of play in the classroom. And before we go on to some ideas about play, I'd like to discuss, because I think this is a very, very important point, are the misconceptions about play in an educational context. We have to remember that children are 3 to 6 years of age. And although there may be some misconceptions, often with parents, that the idea is we learn at school, but we play at home. I think parents have to understand, obviously as teachers we do, that playing has a purpose in the early years classroom. It is how they learn, it is how they best learn, and it is purposeful. So how do we encourage parents, how do we create more of a homeschool connection? Well, there's ways of doing this, and it's very important from the start of the year to make parents and tutors aware of the importance of the approach you're going to be using in your classroom. So homeschool connections, how to nurture them. I think from the outset of any school term in the early years classroom, we need to support parents and tutors. We need to tell them what their children will be learning at different stages of the year and offer guidance as well on how they might implement play-based learning at home. Usually this would be to support what they're learning in class. So imagine, for example, you're learning about food in the classroom and children have been playing in a provision area where you have a kitchen set up, or they're playing with plastic food, or they're making their own recipes. You could suggest to parents and send little notes home, perhaps on a school platform, etc., that today or this week we are learning about food. So why not try to talk about healthy eating at home, perhaps talking about the fruit they have in the bowl at home, and maybe making simple recipes with your children. So all these kind of ideas to nurture this homeschool connection. By doing this, parents will understand the value of play in their child's development. Now, this is whether they be using the second language at home or their first language. It's very important for them to celebrate their home languages as well, as this is obviously very, very important in their cognitive and overall development. You could also engage families by inviting members to lead an activity, such as a song or a story or a dance or a traditional song or rhyme from their culture. Again, the idea of bringing in parents to be able to see what their children are doing in class, to see the value of play in class, and to become part of that community. Because if we have the parents on board, they will be the best advocates for using play in the classroom. And as I mentioned before, to celebrate home languages in the classroom too. So the benefits. The benefits are enormous of using play in the classroom. All research backs up that children learn best through play. And what does it offer them in their development? Well, as you can see from some of the lists, the reams of words we've got here, they develop social and emotional skills as they learn to interact with their classmates. I'm sure you all have those children at the start of the term who come in holding their mummy's hands and crying because they don't want to come to class, because they're not used to socializing. Through play, we help children on this journey to become used to interacting with their classmates, to cooperate. It develops their communication and problem-solving skills as well. And we can just help guide them along the way. In terms of cognitive skills, it improves their overall language and literacy. For example, if we leave children with mark-making tools, by mark-making, I mean they might be crayons, they might be pencils, but at the same time, we're assuming, because I think this is a very important thing to be aware of, that children between 3 and 6 are developing in terms of their literacy skills at completely different rates. They're individuals, and they may learn to read and write anytime between 4 and 6, for example. So we have to be aware that some children will just be mark making. Perhaps they're in a play area and they're making a list or ticking things or writing a shopping list, but in their own language, but they're imitating writing. They're getting used to holding a pen properly and developing their fine motor skills. It can improve their ability to listen more effectively. If they're playing games, they need to listen to their classmates more. You need to know when it's your turn to speak and when it's your turn to listen. It can also improve word association and how they can be used in many different scenarios. So, for example, if we go to the food environment we had before, it could be about talking about food, healthy food. Fruit, apples are healthy, as are bananas, but also shopping. So they understand that these words can be used in a shopping context too, when they can learn small chunks of language, such as, can I have an apple, please? It also cultivates critical thinking skills. And I think this idea of children beginning to think outside of the box, we're giving them more than just information in their heads. We're helping them with their learning journey, and we're going to make them better learners by allowing them to play and think for themselves. For example, playing with geometric shapes can help children to learn about basic shapes, size, numbers, and sequences, which is so important in their overall development. And as I've mentioned before, develops both their gross and fine motor skills at this level. So moving on, let's look at these two types of play I proposed at the beginning of the talk. The first one is child-initiated play. So we're going to have a look at what that is and some activities we can use in the classroom for free play, same word really, a child-initiated play. So child-initiated play is defined as play that is started, led, and controlled by the child rather than adult. Now, for some of us starting out in the early years classroom, this might sound quite shocking and quite, maybe we'll just go into a panic and think this is going to be chaos and it's going to be mayhem, and how can I control this? If we are, and we'll look at this in a bit more detail in a minute, if we are going to set up our classroom with the materials that the children need to play, so for example, you may be doing a role play, so you want them to have dressing up clothes. So imagine it's about professions, so you might have a nurse uniform or a doctor's one or a police one, or etc., etc. How would this be led and controlled by children? They decide what they want to wear, or they decide what they want to paint. So there may be just a theme, and it might be animals, and say, let's paint an animal, but you use the materials that are available and you do whatever you like, basically, but around that theme and with the materials we offer. So what does this do? One, it encourages creativity and spontaneity. You just have to engage children and have the right materials. It promotes agency. Children need, and they will need, to become independent. They've just left their parents' side, and already they're having to be independent in the classroom. Build on children's own interests. The curious thing and the beautiful thing about play-based learning is you can observe. And as a teachers, we observe what children like. We can observe what they're good at. And we should be doing this, maybe even by keeping our own diary about the children in terms of an informal assessment and saying, oh, well, Maya is an extremely good artist. And it would look like Mateo is very good at building. His logical spatial intelligence is very good. We learn a lot about the children in our classrooms through play. And also it allows us to encourage them in things that they are good at too, and to tell them what they're good at. Hands-on learning. Children learn better doing things in general. It develops the ability to think outside the box, which we've talked about before, to take their own decisions, to make opinions, to talk about things with their peers, even on their very simple rudimentary level that they're at. And also with child-initiated play, the process it's more process orientated, i.e. how you get to the end goal, rather than outcome orientated. What is my end goal? Oh, I got here and I did it well. So we're looking at how the process they get to completing an activity and how they feel about it at the end. Also, did they like that activity? Ask children what they enjoyed most about this activity. So let's move on a little bit into some examples. Let's have a look at some examples of free play or child-initiated play activities. So we have symbolic games. We've had the banana. This is a question of leaving objects for children to play with. It could be a cardboard box. If you think about a large cardboard box that we could just upcycle for different things, think about all the things children could use it for. It could be a room in a house. It could be a house. It could be a vehicle. Children can sit in it, they can play, they can paint it. It could be a vehicle that takes them from A to B. There's all kinds of things children might want to make from a box. They may like to fall asleep in it even, or they may like to put the toys in it and make a bed for their favorite toy in the classroom. Things like these, we all have these around the house, cardboard tubes, big ones, small ones. leave these out for the children, see what they can make. What can we make from a cardboard tube? We can make, well, the first thing that occurs to me is a musical instrument. And we can decorate it, paint it, stickers. We could turn it into a school band. We can make their own tune. They can use these to, if you're using a rhyming class, I'm thinking about the early years course that we've just been doing, and there's lots of rhymes, and we could actually to the rhyme, the famous rhyme, for example. Another one, cardboard tube, very easy one. You can turn it into a microphone for asking. We just got 3 little stickers here. This is a little polystyrene ball, but you could use scratched up paper, for example. And this could become like an interviewing activity. So where children can ask simple formulaic questions to their friends, for example, in the second language, what's your name? My name's, what's your name? My name's Nyla, etc. What's your favorite color? My favorite color is yellow. So lots of simpler activities using simple objects that are everyday objects we have at home. Role playing. Children love role playing, and here we have an example of a toys picnic. So for example, you could just bring in or make available to the children paper plates, cups, some serviettes. They can sit them on little chairs in the classroom and let the children play. If you've been working on the topic of food or talking about healthy food, unhealthy food, etc., this is where it's an opportunity for the children to use the language that they've been learning in the classroom. And again, we can observe to see what they've been understanding. The other thing we have here is a nature table. So things that you have outside, depending on the time of year. Obviously in the Northern Hemisphere now we're in autumn. So on this table, we have leaves, we have twigs, we have shells, we have pine cones. What can children make from these? I'm going to show you a couple of examples now of what children can make from leaves, for example. Here we have a little bumblebee. So just two little leaves together. We could draw little eyes, for example. Here we have from my garden, I picked up an ivy leaf today. It wasn't actually falling off the tree, but I had to pick it off the tree. Make a little dog. So here it could be kind of a display. So my dog's called Bruno, and it's by Claire. And also things like from different colored leaves as well. We could use here, we've made a fox, for example, where children can just paint the little nose black, color the eyes, and these are the little tips of leaves as well. So other things we can do, obviously just the shape of leaves lends itself to make other things. If we look at their transient art on the table, so this is where they're making art from nature, items from nature. Here we have leaves. I can almost see a flower forming, for example, in this picture. Also the shape of a leaf could different animals. It could be a fish. So again, letting children explore with objects which don't cost us any money, we can just pick up from outside, and allowing them to think a little bit outside of the box and be imaginative, which children generally are extremely imaginative. So moving on, how can we promote play-based learning in our classroom? Continuous provision areas, for those of you who aren't so familiar, are different areas in a classroom which we set up, which are used, which provide a range of different opportunities for free and guided play. We're going to have a look at some of these areas. I'm not going to great detail at this point because there's going to be a talk later on in the month about continuous provision. But again, it allows them to work towards language learning objectives. So for example, imagine you set up a role-playing area, which may include dressing up items. The language learning objective may be to, for example, to describe things. So imagine a kind of fashion show. Children will be describing the color of the clothes, what their partners are wearing, and you're working towards a language objective about describing things, colors, simple adjectives, and to make them accessible throughout the year. There were some questions in the early sessions about, I don't have a great deal of space in my classroom to have many continuous provision areas. Well, that's fine. You can even have a continuous provision box that you bring in every day and change according to the topic, or even have 2 areas or 1, which you can change according to what you would like the children to play with in class. So depending on your setting, it can be adaptable. So what kind of provision areas could you have in your class? Obviously, we have outside resources, which might be climbing frames, mats, etc., etc. You may have a home area. Now, this is obviously a beautiful one of those play kitchens, which are quite expensive. But if we don't have these available in our centre, then you can just bring in bowls from home, spoons, some pans, things for stirring, bowls. It's very easy to just use materials we have to hand as well. Here we have another role play area. So this would be playing at shops, where we have just a simple things like calculators. Again, we're helping children with their mathematical skills as well. And also communication. If we're looking at ESL, we're looking at using simple phrases in particular contexts. It helps children to understand how to use these. So for example, as simple as, can I have a, so requesting things, please, thank you, how to behave in certain contexts. Then we have things like a construction or small world area. Here we have examples of blocks on tables. There might be, here we have one with geometric shapes as well. It could be Play-Doh, all those kind of materials that children will can manipulate in the class. Here we have as well, I think, an essential one, which is a library or reading area where we have available picture books, storybooks. These could be books without any words that just have pictures, where children can sit down and make up their own story as they talk with a partner. Or again, just this kind of pre-weeding to help support their emerging literacy skills. We're not making any assumptions that they can read at this point, but having a print-rich environment in the early years setting, I think, is essential, that they are seeing words, viewing words. They can make their own labels if they're able to write simple words. Encourage children to label. If not, they can be tracing them. If not, you can provide them. And if not, they can mark making is fine too. So continuous provision. So if we go to look now at guided play, what is the difference between guided play and child-initiated play? Guided play, which is probably what more of us do if you are a language teacher, is where it's a playful activity, but it has an element of teacher support. So what type of support would that be? Well, one, the teacher has a clear learning objective when setting up an activity. An example of this might be at the doctor's, for example. You want children to talk about different parts of the body. Perhaps a part of the body hurts. So that would be your objective in this, that you want children to revise, check that they've understood the parts of the body, and go from there. However, in this scenario, I think children should still have a kind of choice and agency over what they play. So if it's a fashion show, for example, the role play area, we said with clothes, they can choose what they'd like to wear, allow that kind of free choice and freedom for the children to do that. Also with guided play, it can help kind of extend learning beyond what the children might otherwise have learned. So if we're more involved and supporting children, we could also nudge children a little bit to talk about, for example, what they're creating. So if it's a picture, let's say about their favorite toy or their favorite animal, we could say things like, instead of what color is your favorite animal, we could make use more open questions and ask things like, tell me about your animal. So allowing them to use their language more freely and extend their learning beyond what your objective might be if children are able to. It also allows us to provide more support and scaffolding to those children who require it. Also, this kind of self-reflection as well, more opportunities for active participation. Ask children if they like this activity. Would they like to do it again? What was their favourite part of the activity? And always complimenting them on what they were doing and praising them for their efforts. So some guided play. I have a little activity here as well. So for example, we talked about the doctors. So an idea of a more guided play role might be for the teacher to model. So here comes Monkey. It might be for the teacher to model the activity before the children begin to play. So for example, here we can imagine that poor little monkey, he's not feeling very well today. So I might say to monkey, well, what's the matter? And what might the monkey say? Oh, well, if we just have a look, I'll show you what's wrong with monkey. His arm hurts. Oh, poor monkey. Shall we help monkey make it better? And we can make use of things like little bandages. You can encourage children to come up and put his little bandage on his arm. And there he has a little bandage on his arm. He may have a bandage on his ear or on his leg. And how then can we, what would our learning objective be? Well, clearly it would be, we're talking about the parts of the body, but also maybe a question, a simple formulaic question. What's the matter? What's the matter? What's the matter, monkey? Hurts. What's the matter, monkey? It hurts. Okay. Or even you can have things like little stickers I've got here for the doctors. You could put it on your class puppet with little stickers, so the children might stick on the little stickers. Here we go. Oh dear. So my little stickers on their face and say, oh, I'm poorly. I've got red spots. I've got red spots. So again, this would be teacher-led, and our objective is then to let the children go away to these provision areas, perhaps to play in the toy area, and again, to play at being mummies, daddies, doctors, nurses, and to try and use that language which you have modelled. So again, that's the teacher element coming in. There was another little game. Let me have a look. One we're going to have a look at. Yes, we've looked at the favourite toy and my fashion show. And the other one, again, if we can come back to the microphone, would be to use something like this when the children go away to play, to practice any kind of question answer activity, however simple that might be. It might be an interview, a survey, as simple as what's your favorite animal? What's your favorite toy? What's your favorite sport? And so children could go around where you could have interviewers. We can imagine it's in the street, and then they can compile the answers on the board, perhaps using a graph, for example, to represent how many children, for example, like playing football or like skipping or painting, etc. So props, materials are so important in the early years play-based classroom, but they don't necessarily need to be expensive resources. Perhaps we don't have them available. We just need simple things that can be made out of recycled objects, for example. So how do we implement play-based learning in our classroom? Now, often there's a great fear with this, and in a way, we're going back to those kind of misconceptions about children learn at school and they play at home. I hope from this talk we all understand and we're all in agreement that play-based is the way forward. So instead of just opening these little vessels and filling them with lots of facts and everything else at this early age, we're allowing them to learn through play and purposeful play. So if you're not sure how to deliver through play, these are some little tips, top tips to help you along the way. You need to create a very safe and supported environment. So the materials that you do provide for the children, we have to remember they could be from 3 and 6 years old. So there's no sharp objects, no scissors, all this depends on your school and the normatives they have in your school. But again, be aware of making it a very safe environment for them to play in. Provide rich literacy and creative resources. So lots of things for marking, mark making, materials, everyday objects, natural materials. I'm a lover of natural materials in the classroom. Bring in things you find on a beach if you live near the beach. If it's autumn, bring in your leaves, etc. If it's springtime, bring in some pretty flowers and petals, especially if you live in some of these wonderful exotic countries that have fabulous flowers. Use household and natural objects, so things like spoons, rubber bands, buttons, pencil. We're a little bit careful with buttons if they're too young, because obviously that could be a choking hazard, so avoid those in the early years. Things that you could float and sink as well. And real life items in your themed role play areas, so grocery items as well, pots, seeds. If you're lucky enough to have a vegetable garden at your school, you could go outside, children can plant seeds as well. Another way of using nice outside resources. So what's our role in a play-based classroom? So we are a model. We're always a model, and we need to provide linguistic guidance, because if we have linguistic objectives, we want to work towards them. Be flexible in your guidance. Don't always tell the children what to do. Sometimes they should just find their way, and just nudge them a bit. Guide them using guiding questions, for example. Provide directions, obviously. Some children will need more support than others. Observe them. I think this is where we learn a lot about young children playing. Observe how they play. You can prompt them if they're having difficulties. And ask again, I think I mentioned this before, like open questions. Instead of like, what color, what is this ask things like, tell me about, what would you do with this? Get the children to think more critically and make opinions. They are able to at a very early age at their level. So just as a final piece before I hand over back to Georgia, I think play, we looked at the quotes earlier on, but play does drive discovery. Children find out a lot through play. And this also applies to the ESL classroom. And I think if they're learning to discover, then really through discovery, children are learning. So play in the early years classroom for me is a must. I encourage you all to use it more. And I hope this session has provided you, Sue, with some helpful tips and some takeaways to use in your class tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire, for that fantastic presentation. I can see lots of positive comments coming in and feedback, which is wonderful to see. So thank you very much. Before we move on to the Q&A, I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to a couple of things that may be of interest. So a quick reminder that Cambridge Early Years is the first stage on our Cambridge pathway, excuse me, for learners aged 3 to 6 years old. Our approach is centered around play-based learning, which we've been talking about today, and our program helps give learners the best start in life. So please do visit our website for more information on that. Next slide, please.
1 second.
Sure. If you enjoyed this webinar today, we have a fantastic range of professional development support available. This includes our free Getting to Know Cambridge Early Years webinars, as well as more in-depth courses with a smaller number of attendees, so you can work closely with other teachers to develop your understanding and share all of your wonderful ideas. Next slide, please. We also offer more support for play-based learning as part of our early years programme, and this is accessible via the School Support Hub with videos and further reading, and also inside our teaching resources. There are a variety of playful activity ideas, as well as guidance in our continuous provision and guided play feature as well. So our teaching resources are available as part of the early years programme fee and can also be purchased separately. So we'll include links to all of this information in the follow-up email for you, which you'll receive 7 days after the webinar has taken place. So it's now time for our Q&A. If you have any questions you'd like answered, make sure you post them in the box before the question ends. So I'm going to go to our first question now, which is, how can we convince school management that play-based learning is not a waste of time? So Claire, I'm going to come to you for that one.
That's a big question, isn't it? It's $1 million question. I understand that curriculum pressures often mean that, or we think that play-based learning will not fulfill those criteria. I really think it is a case of dialogue. I think it is a case of dialogue. I think it is a case of inviting, even as we're talking about inviting parents in, I think it's also a case for inviting in school managers to seeing how play-based learning works in the young learners classroom, because often it is that people don't know, and it really is a misconception. So I think it's something we have to work at. I think, if you think how traditional education years and years back, well, children at this age wouldn't even be in education. Many children wouldn't have the opportunity anyway. But if you think about how things have moved on, then this really is a type of evolution. And it's a question of time and informing people of the benefits of play-based learning.
Thank you, Claire. That's very helpful. Our next question is on classroom size. So in your opinion, what is the ideal class for an effective play-based learning environment?
Now, this is another big question, because we don't have a control over the size of our classes. Yeah. And depending on the country you live on, it could be anything, live in, then it could be anything from 18 to 40, etc., etc. So depending on where you live, I will tell you, ideally, when I've been working in the early years classroom, my ideal number is around the 20 mark, possibly 25, because it allows for a lot of interaction as well. Above that, classroom management does become more challenging. There's no doubt about that. But again, well, that would need another webinar on classroom management in the early years. We could do that another day. But ideally, I would say in the 20-ish range is ideal for early years setting.
Great, thank you so much, Claire. Our next question today is surrounding special educational needs, and I'm going to bring Abby Barnett on for this as well. So Abby is our Deputy Director of Curriculum Programmes. So Abby, if you've got any thoughts, please do jump in as and when suitable. But the question is, do you have any advice for engaging learners with special educational needs with play-based learning? And I think the question was specifically referring to children with autism. Now we know that's quite a broad spectrum, and there can be different levels of autism. But yes, does anybody have any advice that they'd like to come in on that question?
Abigail, would you like to say something, or should I'm not. Yes, please, Abigail, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Thanks, Claire. Yeah, and I know this has come up a lot actually already from early years teachers that I've been talking to, because they feel that they might be the first kind of professional that's working with children, and you might be the first ones to identify or recognise that there is an additional need. And I know that as teachers you really want to get things right and to support these children as much as possible. Now, again, according to, things differ from country to country in terms of the processes that might be in place or the policies that might be in place for, what to do when you identify that there could be an additional need, how you report that, what kind of access you get to additional help and support. And of course, as we've mentioned, this term, special education needs, can cover a really vast array of different needs that you might see in the classroom. So I think that you're going to be observing, you're going to be noticing, and you're then going to want to be able to support the child as much as possible. I think the communication that you have with the parents is really, really helpful, because they will already have an understanding of things that might be particularly a challenge for that child. You've referred to the autistic spectrum. There might be things that are particularly triggering, things that child is particularly sensitive to, that you can do something about in your environment. So making sure that there's perhaps particular space or times or routines that are going to help the child to feel a bit more familiar, a bit more confident, a bit more comfortable in the environment. As I say, we know that this question is going to crop up a lot. So again, if you are interested in engaging more with Cambridge on our programme, we've got a whole section on our school support hub, which provides lots of guidance about providing an inclusive learning environment. So it's really important that we're not categorising or labelling children very early on and thinking that everything we do for them has to be different. what we're trying to do is to provide an environment where we can include all the children, make them feel that they belong, that they're supported. So there's lots of guidance on our website about how to make your environment inclusive, but also we have got some really useful checklists and guidance for some of the main sort of categories of additional needs that you might come across, and ways that you can provide additional support. And again, you know, I really appreciate the challenges that you're going through, because for some children it might be that they are just taking longer to develop in some areas. For some children it might be around language and sort of all tied up with the fact that they're operating maybe not in their first language. So just, you know, don't worry, and don't think that you've got to get everything sort of diagnosed and categorized and a whole set of different things to do with these children. You're going to be building a relationship with them, you're going to be developing your understanding of them, and you're going to be finding out what works and how you're able to support them. So that was quite a long answer, but Claire, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add there?
That was great. I mean, as I said, the only thing what I wouldn't add, but just to sort of, you know, highlight is that play-based learning, because of the kind of different, if you're setting up continuous provision areas, it is varied, and it's naturally an inclusive environment. So for example, if you do have on the autistic noise, for example, there's always a quiet area. Go to the quiet area, which might be the reading area. That it's a very inclusive environment, a play-based one. So as a starting out point for dealing with children with certain issues, then this is a good point to start, I think.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was very helpful and very thorough. So thank you for that. The next question we have is play-based learning helpful in developing the cognitive abilities of learners as well as gross motor abilities? So I'll come to you first, Claire, on this one.
Yeah, I think we picked up on this a little bit in the session as well, that play-based learning contributes to the overall development of the child. So cognitive abilities as well as physical developmental. So we talked about if it's outside play, they'll be moving their bodies, types of games you might use, like a Simon Says, or just instructions for them to do things. Children are learning how to balance. A fun game for them is standing on one leg, for example, but also cognitively, not just in terms of their development in terms of language. We're also looking in terms of their social abilities, their abilities to cooperate with others. So it really is a full package. Play-based learning develops the whole child.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claire. We have a question now about motivation. So how can you motivate learners that don't necessarily want to engage in play-based learning? And Abby, I'll come to you first on this one to see if you have any advice for our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, Claire started off with those quotes. It's really natural. We're kind of programmed to play. We might not all enjoy the same types of play, and it's great that we can introduce children to different types of play. But really, we should see this as very much just how we operate in the world. At this time in our lives, our brains are developing at a tremendous rate. So they're physically still growing, and our brains are making thousands and thousands of new connections every day because we are meeting and encountering things for the first time. So that's really natural. Play is natural. Exploration and discovery is natural. And you can see how accessible a lot of the things that Claire's talked about today are. It's not about setting up very complex scenarios and that children are going to find intimidating. It's done with very simple questions and objects, and really just setting up these opportunities for children to do what will come very naturally to them. So yeah, and hopefully Claire in her examples today has shown that there's a real range of things there. So I don't know if the question was about a specific child and a specific type of play that they weren't interested in, but I'm sure from the range of examples we've had today, hopefully that the question will have got some ideas about other types of play that maybe they can use to engage their children.
Also, if I can just add, I mean, I also say to teachers when I'm doing training session that when you've prepared your class and you start a game, it may be a game that's more teacher led, and you realize it's not working. It may be just something, you know, maybe it's Monday morning, maybe it's raining outside. The children are just not quite there. I always say, don't be afraid of changing the activity. Stop the activity, do something else. Perhaps they don't want to be up and be really active. They prefer to have a quiet activity. And again, if it's a play-based area, let's just do some reading. Let's read a story. Let's go to the reading area. Let's lie down and listen to the rhymes from the course. Feel free as teachers as well to change if something isn't working.
Thank you both. Very helpful advice there. Our next question is about parents. So how can we involve parents in early years education? And do you have any advice on that one, Claire?
I think on one of the slides we talked about homeschool connections. I think in early years it's essential to establish a healthy relationship with parents and tutors. And I think we have to do this from the outset. So, for example, we'll need to, in many courses, and we will in the course, the curriculum, the new course as well, is we make a lot of suggestions for homeschool. So informing parents via an online platform. It may also be I'm sorry about that. It may also be, for example, I just lost my track. So let's go back to the 1 second.
Here we go, don't worry, Claire.
Sorry, I've lost my flow there. I've lost my flow. So I was saying, I was talking about, could you bring me back?
So the question was involving parents in the earliest.
Thank you, the parents. So yes, so either sending it via online platform, letters as well, perhaps what they might be learning each month. I mean, it's not a constant, you know, a regular contact is important. So even sending children's work home, I think is very important to see what the children have been doing at school. What else can we do? The letters, also things like if you do have a class puppet, very nice little activity is actually to send it home. So you have kind of like a rota and you have like a class puppet scrapbook, for example, what they've been doing in class with the children, what they do at home. Perhaps if they're making a recipe at school, they can make it at home. It's just encouraging these connections, because what we don't want is misunderstandings and this idea like my child's playing too much in class. No, they're playing and they're learning, and this is what they're learning. And also inviting parents to class. Parents who would like them, invite them to class. They may be from a different culture. They maybe like to read a story from their culture. Let them come in and guide an activity. Incorporate parents as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I think, of course, parents might have in mind their own education that they went through. And if play-based learning was not the approach that they remember or that they've seen, then they might have some more questions about it. And again, we've heard from some specific challenges or some specific examples. So for example, one of the ones I've commonly heard is that parents want their children to be able to count to a very high number very, very quickly, and that they think that means that the children are progressing well. Whereas in our approach, we think it's really important that the children can't just count, but that they really understand the numbers, they understand the concepts of numbers, the different ways that we can represent numbers and what you can do with numbers. So we focus on a smaller range of numbers in our curriculum. So it's really important that we can communicate clearly to the parents about why we're doing what we're doing, and that we very much have the best interests. You know, you can say very confidently, if you follow our programme, look, Cambridge has done all the research, Cambridge has got the evidence about what works for early years, so please trust us. And I think that's great advice from Claire, to invite the parents in. I think getting them to see it and how it works in practice, it is the best way to sort of answer their questions that they might have.
Thank you. I think you're absolutely right that communication is definitely key with parents. Our next question is, how can we overcome arguments or conflicts between children during play-based learning? Sometimes children may become moody or simply want to dominate an area of play. Do you have any advice for that, Claire?
This is definitely where we step in to support and advise. I think we should always do it in a conciliatory fashion. And explain to children, always explaining them a better way of dealing with the situation, involving other peers as well. I think if a child is being particularly upsetting other children, then just removing, taking them to a different area, giving them another activity to do. I think in the early session I talked about children who find it very difficult to sit still. So for example, if you're singing a song or a story time, for example, is a good example of this. Perhaps they find it difficult to pay attention for long periods of time, is to give them a role. Often these children, all they need is to be holding something. So they could be holding the class puppet, they could be your helper, they could be your classroom helper. So give them a task. But obviously if children are not doing the activity well, then again, in fact, the puppet is a great one for, if you don't mind putting on silly little voices, which I used to like to do, the puppet would actually dive in as the English speaking puppet to resolve the conflicts between the children, and children usually react immediately if there's something make-believe dealing with this issue.
I love that idea. That's excellent. It's a really fun one. I think we've got time just for one more question. And somebody actually asked, is there an early years curriculum framework? And they also made the comment that they can't download it anywhere. So you can't download it, but I would recommend going to look at our website at Cambridge International to find out more about the programme, and also speaking to your local Cambridge team member to find out more. But Abby, I did want to come to you and just say, is there anything that you wanted to say about the new curriculum framework and share with our listeners today?
Yeah, thanks, Georgia. Yeah, so we've designed the curriculum to be a holistic curriculum and to be a curriculum that really supports the play-based learning approaches that we focused on today. We're really proud of the work that we've done to develop the curriculum. And for those of you who do work with Cambridge at other stages of the pathway, it really supports at the end of the early years curriculum transitioning successfully into primary. But what we very much wanted to do was to create that best foundation, that best start for our learners. So there is focus on all of the areas we want our children to develop. Their language, communication and literacy, of course, their mathematics, of course, but you will find in there that we also cover creative expression, their physical development, how they understand the world, so the very beginnings of what will become their understanding of computing and science and humanities. So we're really setting them up for success. We've also got a strong focus on personal, social and emotional development, where we're really helping you to understand some of the areas within that which will help learners to become and to continue to be really successful right through their learning, such as self-regulation. So we've paid attention to everything that we think is important in the curriculum, and we think that makes it the best start. So yes, please do have a look at the information that's there, and as Georgia says, you can then follow up to get more information and have a deep dive into that curriculum. And we look forward to hearing from many of you that start the journey with Cambridge.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Abby. That's all we have time for today. So thank you for all of your questions, and apologies if we didn't get around to answering yours. Thanks also to Claire for taking the time to present today. So that just leaves me to say, have a great rest of your day wherever you are. And thank you again on behalf of Cambridge University Press and Assessment. Goodbye for now.
Bye-bye.